Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 420. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast. This week's interview is with Mary Hasavari. Mary's a filmmaker and screenwriter based in Oslo, Norway. With her mixed Thai-Iranian heritage, Mary has a most unique story and viewpoint in her filmmaking, leveraging her third culture life to make engaging films. In this conversation with Mary, we discuss her journey into filmmaking, how film and storytelling have been changing, as well as look at some of her ongoing projects, including her documentary, Dharma, about female Buddhist monks, and a feature-length fiction, Persona. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. Please do consider to drop in your rating and review. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Mary Hasavari, great to have you on the show. You and I were introduced to one another by Muiwa, and he said, you've got to meet this crazy, different film writer and director living in Norway. You'll see. And by gum, he was right. Mary, in your own words, how do you like to describe yourself?
I would describe myself as a filmmaker, but also a third culture kid and a child of God.
Right. So I kind of have an idea what child of God means, but I need a little bit more help on third culture kid. Tell me more.
So a third culture kid is usually a person that has been brought up in a place where they were not born. Or it can also mean, it could also mean a person that has a very, diverse multicultural background. And then, those different backgrounds come together and form, like a third culture.
Got it. Oh, now I get it. I don't know. Maybe there's a fourth, fifth culture in you as well. You have many cultures too. Explain us how you got to Oslo, Mary.
How I got to Oslo, well, I moved with my parents to Moss first, actually. My dad and my mom. So my dad is from Iran, and my mom is from Thailand, and they met in Thailand. My mom, she was doing some volunteer work, and my father, happened to be in that same area, and then so they met, and one thing led to another. But
Yes, they
he
do.
was also, yeah, but he was actually a political refugee, and because he's been, an activist and working quite actively against the new regime, because what a lot of people don't know is that Iran used to be a very liberal country before, Khomeini took over. So it was very strange for the people living there. It's as if, all of a sudden, we have to wear a burqa. Like, why? We haven't been doing that for, the longest time. So, yeah, so usually like intellectuals, like artists, like people who, were just like, didn't put up with it in general, had to leave. So one of them were my dad, and so he got asylum in Norway, and that's how we came to Norway. And then me and my mom came after. So we stayed in Moss first, and then shortly after we moved to Oslo, and that's how I got to Oslo.
Yes, and so too, for those of you who are listening, Mary is clearly not an average-looking Norwegian, which makes it obviously very different in such a country. And I was wondering, having an activist father like that, that must be, for me, it feels like it must be rather impressive. How is it like to, I mean, obviously he's your dad, so there's that. But what does that mean at dinner parties, dinner tables? Are we regularly talking about politics? Are we regularly standing up for what we
Yes,
believe?
we are. And sometimes in clash with each other, but sometimes, we also agree. It's I think it's usually it's quite common that people who used to be an activist in their youth, in the 70s and 80s, these days they're not as, active, or maybe not at all. They have the regular jobs, and everything. But he's still passionate about, justice and those kind of subjects. But growing up, I always asked him to tell me stories about, his youth and growing up in Iran, because he always had so many interesting stories and experiences. And it really sounded like an action movie, to me.
Not only
So,
that,
yeah.
but there's also just, so it was a different time. I mean, compared to
Mm,
what it is today. So he acts almost as a sort of a historian of the time under the Shah, and a time prior to the image that we have of Iran today, which of course is just the image that the media portrays. There's still, I'm sure, from what I've heard, plenty of people within Iran who aren't in the same mode, or who were, let's say, silently trying to activate against what's going on.
mm.
So, Mary, you're now living in Norway. You've got this amazing parents, and you decide that you want to get into communications, and more specifically into film. Tell us how that path happened.
Well, my first, meeting with filmmaking was when I was 16, and I made a short film. That time it was about, it was a documentary about black metal and teenagers, in liking that kind of music. And what fascinated me about them was sort of like sort of like the contrast between personality and the aggression, like the aggressiveness, not the aggression, but the aggressiveness in the music. Because most black metal kids are very sweet and soft, and like in that sense. And most people might not think that when they see them, because they have like these leather clothes on, and nails and screaming music and stuff. And it has always fascinated me about people in general, how people have this shadow and light to them, and so when it came to documentary work, I started quite early, and it was usually in terms of, subjects in terms of youth culture. Um, yeah, and then after that, I started doing other things. But I came back to filmmaking again around age 23. I started making more short films, and then I decided that I wanted to go to film school. And yeah, that's
Where did you go to
uh,
film school?
London Film School.
So you get introduced to, really, I would characterize London as a hotbed of film. It's
Hmm.
certainly one of the more creative centers in the world. What did that do for you? And you've already got your three cultures. What happened to Mary passing through the London Film School?
London Film School is also quite multicultural because they have students from all over the world. A lot of students from Iran, actually, surprisingly. Um, but yeah, no, it was interesting, and it was, like you say, it was such a melting pot of, of people. But yeah, I prior to that, I actually worked for a film production company in Bangkok as an assistant. And prior to that, I worked as an assistant for the Rotterdam International Film Festival. So I had already, in a way, dipped my toe into the film industry even prior to uh, starting film school.
So you announced that your interest is in looking at the light and the dark, the different sides of people. There are plenty of ways that one could explore the light and the dark, and the different ways of personality. What is it about film that draw you to that medium as opposed to others?
For me, it's the most complete medium, when it comes to the way I want to express myself, express the subject matters that, and investigate the subject matters and explore that I find interesting. Because with film, you have moving images, you have the written word, you have music, you have sound, you have light, you have time, so you have all these elements that together, you know, form film as a medium that I feel like it's most complete, because I have dabbled into other mediums prior to that, and I didn't feel like, uh, I didn't feel like I could explore what I want to explore in the fullest extent, you could say. So, yeah, that's why I chose film.
So when you're behind the camera, or writing even a script, of course, or directing in general, you're naturally going to, well, I assume, bring a bias to your eye. It's called a prism, it's an angle. How would you describe yours?
My perspective, you mean? Yeah. Uh, well, I feel like my perspective, I actually call it synthesis because it's in my nature, it is how who I am and how I was brought up in terms of my influence, cultural influence, but also in terms of interest. And that, as an extension of that, you could say, I feel like I naturally gravitated towards non-dualism and looking at how, how we are essentially one, and how we can, how new things are created, from like the foundation of different elements that initially look like opposites. Yeah.
So non-dualism,
Yeah.
explain a little bit more for me. What do you mean by non-dualism?
So dualism is like the black and white, for example, like evil and good. It's, for me, it's like a simplification of reality, but it's easier for our brains to grasp. So I think a lot of people latch onto that. It's easy to understand. While non-dualism, it's actually the reality because everything is, people, we have both darkness and light to us. For example, we have light and we have day and we have night. It's part of the same. So it's like, it's a more complete way of viewing reality, in my opinion. Yeah.
When just listening to you, it makes me think, 'cause I like words as well. I kind of say I want to feel that there is within the descriptions still things that stand out. And so when you say day and night, actually a day has the night within it. When we talk about a day, Monday is Monday day and Monday night. And so I was thinking about that, but I sense what you're saying, of course. And there's dusk, there's dawn, and there's the whole spectrum up until noon, high noon, and then the darkness at the most profound part of the hour. And there's light and different shades of light throughout the 24 hours.
For sure. Yes, if I get you right, it might seem that I'm saying that everything is the same, like one color in a way, but that's not what I'm saying.
Well, no, yeah, what you were saying was, as I understood it, was that there is a oneness, there is a
Yeah,
one thing, but that it doesn't come from male or female. It comes from a spectrum of feelings and a spectrum of identities to become the
yeah,
one person that you are.
yeah, exactly.
So much more nuanced, all the same.
Mm,
So when one of the things that's of real interest to me and certainly to many listeners is storytelling.
hmm
It's one of those hot, trendy topics in business. I want to start by just asking, how do you feel storytelling has evolved? You obviously, as a child, you would have seen certain films, and now you're telling other stories. How would you describe the evolution of storytelling over your lifetime? Because I'm not going to ask you to sort of go back to Disney in the 50s.
In my lifetime, I feel like it has become more diverse. It's become uh, like it has become less dualistic. It has become, there's an increased interest to hear about different perspectives that we haven't really heard before, that haven't really gotten the platform before. So I feel that is the biggest uh, change in my lifetime. New
So
creators have gotten, the chance to tell their stories, basically.
yeah, you see that obviously in the way, perhaps in reaction, but that the BAFTAs and the Oscars are now really putting in the fore. Come,
Absolutely. And I feel like, I think that the the traction that these movements have gotten wouldn't have been possible without social media, essentially, because there was this narrative going in the past, narrative, like speaking of stories, uh, about how people didn't want to see women leads, for example, unless it was a rom com. Like executives in different studios would actually say that. And of course, they were like, men. And they didn't think that, oh, it's because we chose a male director, we chose a male writer to write this character. So for some reason, she became like super one dimensional and like a sexual object, and no one can relate to that because that's not a human. You know what I mean? So, but they could keep this narrative because no one could prove them wrong, because the times they had tried, those movies had flopped, and there were no other proof otherwise, right? But with social media, we see, there people come in and say, you know what, this is unacceptable. We don't want to see that crap. You want to see this. You can mobilize, and create a movement and be like, boycott that film, let's watch this film and support this film. So, this, I feel like social media has really been essential when it comes to accelerating those movements, that were already, you know, sprouting, and but I didn't have the chance to accelerate in the same speed as it has until recently.
and so with regard to writing, so as you know, I've dabbled in a little bit of film myself, and certainly studied film at university. Script writing, I wonder of the parallels in the way film script writing has evolved, in that there was a time where we would do things like boring character development. And then little by little, all character development got washed out in favor of action. And you expressed everything through action. Show it, don't tell it kind of approach. Where are we today in script writing? Is that still the norm if you want to make blockbusters? Or do you feel then that in the abilities for us to have a nuanced, non-dualistic approach to writing, we're finally getting back to a little bit more nuanced character development?
I feel like both are sort of happening at the same time because, when something happens, it usually like a reaction to that happens in parallel. So you see how there's like a surge of all these franchise films and sequel after sequel, and it looks like someone just put, like in editing, it looks like someone just put in a blender, and you and it's just like, what am I watching? But so I feel like the speed that these are churned out, in, and that doesn't really afford the time it takes to really dive into the character development, of the piece. But also, I think because for some reason, a lot of it appeals to many people to, just look at a lot of shiny objects moving. Then there's a big market for that, so that's why that's happening. But on the other hand, there's also sort of like a counter movement to that, where people are, and screenwriters are also, going deeper into storytelling and character driven stories. And and producers are looking for perspectives that we haven't really seen on the big screen yet, and angles. So, yeah, I think both are sort of happening at the same time right now.
One of the challenges we have in the different ways that we might communicate, whether it's as a writer, filmmaker, journalist, we are still beholden to the money, the dollar. And so if you make a big gangbuster, blockbuster, action oriented, huge number 17 in the list of, the 17th version, yeah, at least we're going to make money. So when you're on the other side, on the other hand, the equation of finances is much more complicated. At least that's what I observe. There may be an appetite to see it, but distribution's changed a lot. People seem to have less and less patience for these things. Snip, 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 snip. Now, run it out. My attention's not going to last if you are just trying to watch paint dry.
I wouldn't call that kind of filmmaking watching paint dry, though. At least not for me, because I make those kind of films as well. But I feel like, not everyone's the same. Not everyone likes superhero movies. And some people might like that and like, character dramas or things that have more depth basically and more original visually. So they're definitely a market for that as well. Just look at the recent films like like for example Parasite, that did very well.
The Korean film.
Yeah, Nomadland, and so on and so forth. Get Out, So in the with those films, they're lower budget, but you can actually, if it hits, you could actually earn a lot with low risk. Like Get Out, it was made on 4.5 million budget and made like over 200 million, right? While these blockbuster films, the budget is like, 2, 3 million. So there's a higher risk, you know.
For sure. Uh, and also, if we're going to talk about these types of things, we can celebrate. Well, first of all, I like watching paint dry. I'm a little.
Okay.
I
You might
read
be the
book.
one of the few in the world.
No, well, of course, but I read books. I'm one of those guys that can do
But
slow time.
is that watching paint dry though? I don't know.
It's an allegory. It's an allegory for shoot 'em ups and making everyone die right away and big explosions, shiny objects. It's the just like the action films aren't necessarily all about shiny objects. Doing character development isn't necessarily about paint drying, of course. I can appreciate that. And yet in film, you're in a business where, for me, for having observed it a little bit, getting a film to come out, much less be successful, that can be like paint drying, because
Yes.
the number of films that go from script to blockbuster, well, it's a very low percentage. And so what do you think what does it take to make a story that you have, whether it's a documentary or a fictional story, work? What are the things that work today in the minds of the viewers? Because ultimately that's where the money lies. Yet you have to go through all the getting money, producers. I mean, one of the things, Mary, that I always laugh at, I mean, I kind of frown at, scowl, is the number of production companies that are involved when you do the credits. It's production house 1 and production house 2 and production. I mean, this goes on. This takes up a minute of your time just to announce, the scroll through all the different participants in getting the film to happen. Because, by the way, it's very complicated.
Yeah, I think you need to have a unique perspective. And it's getting more I think it's more important now than ever. And I think you have to not only have a unique perspective, you also have to, it has to be part of the zeitgeist. It has to be socially relevant, relevant to people's lives, essentially. So it's like a combination of those things. And it also has to, I think uh, in the indie film scene, it has to be, you have to have a unique perspective that's socially relevant, but also has an entertainment has also has some entertainment value, So it's like balancing those elements in a way. Yeah.
So when you're doing a film, whether it's again more the fiction version as you do or documentary as you do, to what extent does the fact that this could be viewed on a mobile phone, has this entered into, I mean, you can actually film it on a mobile phone, but the fact is that so many more, especially amongst the youngsters, are enjoying consuming video and film on a tiny screen. Well, I mean, even though it's a pretty whopping iPhone screen or whatever, does that come into play nowadays, or is that just, well, that's the way it is?
Interesting that you should mention that because I'm part of a group exhibition, like an art exhibition here in Norway, and I'm actually going to exhibit one of my pieces is actually one of my films on a mobile phone. That's one of my sculptures. And what I'm questioning is that what you're saying, like is this the best format to watch a film? Maybe it is, I don't know. But for me, like I sort of grew up romanticizing the big screen, the cinema. And I still feel like I still want to have my films in the cinema, But these days, a lot is being streamed as well. And it's like, uh, it's a higher likelihood of getting a profit through those channels and also for more people to see it, which also as filmmakers we want people to see our work. So there's like pros and cons, but I sometimes find myself watching films on my phone as well, like if I'm traveling, for example, but it really depends on the film. Like some films they're like I want to savor them, and I see that it's like they're visually interesting, like I want to see them on a big screen. I don't want to just see them like on my phone while someone's talking to me in the background and stuff like that. So it depends on the level of engagement that I feel like the viewer want to commit, but now they have the option. Like it's also a balance between accessibility, and immersion as well. Yeah.
I mean, my tendency is to believe that's a deformation of the film industry to want to have it on a big screen, especially when you consider the implosion of cinema centers in the pandemic, where it's all about just the
Mm,
computer screen and the mobile screen as it has been for now.
mm,
And yet so I mean, of course, I've seen my film projected on big screen. It was shot in high definition, and it has the ability to occupy the full screen, because as a real filmmaker you're going to think about that. You're going to think about the top right of the screen. You're going to think about movements left to right and in all these cinematic elements. When you're on a mobile screen, of course, it's smaller real estate. I mean, it's still the same format, if you will, in terms of a 16 by 9 or whatever type of format, but the attention to detail isn't quite as possible. You can't just focus on the top right of the screen. I mean, because your eyes see everything, it's right there. Secondly, as you say, you've got this consumption that's happening probably while things are happening around you on an airplane, people are talking. So you know that on a mobile, the chances are there's a sort of a more chaotic environment around which. And lastly, there's also bandwidth. And so while the high definition, high resolution version of the film is just a whopping file, you've also got to have the small, quick and easy, light bandwidth, streams quickly, those type of considerations. Maybe that's just a formatting question, but I have to believe that in the creation conception of the film, that also could have an impact.
Yeah, it can have, and you could be creative about it too. But if you want to. But I feel like for the, like for a lot of people, I think a film is a film. For a director, you think like you have the film that you want to create, and whether that is watched on the big screen or the small screen, the TV screen, or the mini screen, the phone. It's sort of, I feel like it, for a lot of directors, it comes as a second thought, at least for me. I'm thinking about the film in itself, as a contained piece, whether it's viewed here or there, you could say. Yeah.
All right. So film making success. Oftentimes that would be, well, did you make money? How do you evaluate success in your films?
I'm not really in that, like, like super commercial space yet. But I, like for me, it's like the primary goal is to get the film made. And, in order to get it made, the producers who get involved, they also have to feel like, in addition to believe in the artistic merits of the work, they also have to feel like uh, they're not losing their investors' money, or else they might not get the opportunity to make another film, basically. So it's sort of like a balance. I feel like with Dama, with my documentary, I didn't have to think about that element, I guess, at all, because it is governmentally funded. It's funded by the Norwegian Arts Council. So it is also a stage play, performance. So there I didn't have to. Of course, I want people to watch it. Every artist, they don't want to just, not everyone, of course. There are some weirdo here and there who just want to create something and not show it. But I want to show my work. I want to connect with the audience. Um, but I don't have the audience primarily in mind, like I'm thinking about what is the ultimate film I can make, and then I cross my fingers and hope it connects with people, basically. But when it comes to Persona, which is looks like it's going to be my feature debut as a director for fiction, it I deliberately chose a genre, to make it a genre film, even though I'm doing it in my own way, you could say. So I chose thriller as the genre, because I also happen to like that genre, and but within that, I'm actually combining a lot, like I call the genre of films that I'm making for synthesis, because I have comedy in there, like I have different kinds of elements in there that won't necessarily make it only one genre, but I chose that framework, you could say, because I knew that if I make a film within this framework, it will also up the chances for me to actually get this made. Yeah.
Right. It ticks a box at some level. You don't need to explain, well, this is not either this or that. It sounds, for me, it's like music sometimes. On
Mm,
iTunes, they have all these genres. And
yeah.
I don't know whether it's pop rock, funk rock,
Yeah.
funky pop. I mean, what genre is it? I just need to put it in a box, because that's how the business rolls. You need to be simple to certain people when you're
But
trying to explain.
I think that's expanding, I think even Grimes, she created a new genre now on Spotify where she and Bjork and some other artists who fit that mold, which is not a mold, it's like a combination of electro, pop, this, that. uh, I forgot what she called it, but that is a way of creating, a space for yourself where you don't feel like you seem to fit in. And that's what I'm doing too with synthesis. It is a genre that, and an art movement actually here in Norway that me and my co-director for Dama created. And this film genre, it is where different genres actually meet, because I personally tend to like these kind of films that don't follow a specific mold, but, have elements of comedy, they have elements of thriller, drama, all of a sudden it's crime, And actually, a lot of Korean dramas, Korean TV shows, they actually do that and very successfully. A lot of Korean films too. So, yeah, so that's sort of what I'm doing. And I feel like it's like second nature to me, because my whole life I've never fit into one box. Even literally when I have to tick up ethnicity, I have to tick up other, you know what I mean? So I feel like when you don't fit into a mold because people insist on having these boxes, then you just have to create your own, you know?
I love it. So with Persona, you've got this quote unquote thriller. At least let's call it a fiction feature length towards that. The world of filmmaking is filled with lots of stories of filmmaking, including rivalries and off-screen situations, romances, and I would have to argue that in the past, I think you wouldn't disagree, it was a very masculine world.
For
That's
sure.
essentially the way it was. Now, a woman behind the camera directing, what does that what does that involve that's different? I mean, albeit you're of course not just a woman, you have your third culture, you have different elements to you, but how do you describe your touch, your prism when you are in that role of directing? Because you are obviously the boss on the
Right.
set.
Well, I think that, like the the work or the art will always be a reflection of the artist. And who the artist is based on their experience and their life experience. So a film that I make will be very different to the film that you make, for example, even if, let's say, we're interested in the same subject matters, because we come at it from different perspectives. Uh,
Different
so it's,
baggage, different knowledge
yeah,
of film,
exactly.
different
And the
things
way
we're trying.
we, exactly, and the way we, a perspective on people too, I know of men, of women, and those kind of things. As a woman, I'm very aware of, for example, being objectified, or how women are objectified and how it sort of dehumanizes you, and how we can make a character boring, because they often just have like one note. If you chose to only do that, or it becomes distracting because it's that, so, but while a man walking, through life without having experienced that might not be so aware of that. So that's just one example of how women sometimes can, or a woman director can have a different perspective, versus a male director.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, so another interesting interplay is that you have also been doing documentaries, and this is something that I certainly know a lot more of for only having done one, but at least having done that. And the role of a director in a documentary is quite radically different than in a film, because you just can't tell the priestess, jump to the left. No, this is a documentary, and I'm telling the reality. Well, of course, you're filming and you're creating what we should call some kind of truth, but you can't impose so many things on the actors who are real people. Talk us through how being a woman in that role is different than the one where you are doing drama and persona, and you're doing a fictional element?
How is being a woman in a documentary as documentary director different to in fiction? Um, hmm. I think it's, as a director, you always, it's always your perspective. It's always going to be subjective. And the way you portray a person, your subject, your interview subject, for example, or any subject, theme, will be colored by you as a person. So I think that in a way, there are a lot of similarities because as a director, regardless whether it's fiction or documentary, you're still shaping the film, you're still putting your perspective on the narrative. Um, and but I feel like in certain spaces, it becomes even more evident when it comes to access, for example, and the way that the subject relates to you. Let's say in Dama, I'm going to interview male boys, boys who are in a youth detention center. So they will relate. I imagine they relate different to me than my co-director, who is a man. So that's how we can complement each other because they might tell things to him that they might not tell me, and they might tell me something that they might not feel comfortable telling him. So, and the same with the female monks, there might be some things that they want to tell me that they won't tell him, and vice versa. So that's also how it can be more, directly different. But I feel like in terms of directing, it will always be a reflection of the artist, whether it's in the documentary space or in the fiction space.
So, and the last zone I wanted to get into was the editing. If you're in marketing, business, making stories is important. Videos is a huge opportunity to communicate. The editor, I discovered in my life and my experience, was just scintillatingly important. And I had the experience of working with two different editors and seeing just how radically different an editor can be in terms of their imprint, their fingerprint on the way a film is made. How important is it in your mind? I'd just love to have you share your experience of the role of the editor in the final product of a film, whether it's documentary or a feature length.
The editor is very essential, like just like the cinematographer is essential, and sound for that matter. But I feel like it depends on the director and how they work, like uh, like uh, how how involved they are, and how much they have sort of pre planned in a way, in terms of structure. If they work more ad hoc, like they have like sort of like a vague frame and then they shoot, like some people do that and they shoot a lot of footage and then it's like, okay, well, here you go. You know what I mean? Then, it's going to make a huge difference compared to what you had in mind going in. And it will make a difference regardless. You will always discover something new with your editor, just like you would with your actors as well, just like you would in on with your interview subjects too. It's like a constant. The film is like an organic living thing in a way, like it's constantly being shaped, but taking form. But the way I work is that I kind of have a structure in mind before going in. I'm kind of like a sculptor, so I have the structure in mind. So the main shape will happen maybe on set, like the the actors might do something that I didn't expect, and I'm like, okay, let's go with that, or the subject might say something, or we might discover something while we're there. Um, but the shape of the piece, I've sort of already, the framework I've already created in my mind, you could say, and then I communicate that to the editor after. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important, that initial contact with everybody where you sort of set down what you're looking for, what you're expecting. And if you're looking for total flexibility, then you can set that up at the beginning. Or you say, no, 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 it's my way or the highway, or whatever is your path as you get into it in that very first setup, where you establish the authority, the authorial position as the director of your film. Well, fascinating, Mary. So what projects are you working on? Where can people see your work or connect with you?
Well, yeah, I just finished a short film called Dannelse, which means formation. So we are putting that out to the world soon. So hopefully you'll see it in a film festival very soon. Um, I'm also in pre-production with my documentary, Dama, that we talked about. So if we get to shoot that, hopefully end of this year, you'll get to see that next year. And also, I'm now in the late stages of development of my feature debut persona. And we are planning on shooting this year, but God willing, So hopefully you'll see that beginning of next year too. And on social media, you can find me on Instagram. My name, Mary Hasavari.
Lovely. Persona, is this a wink to Carl Jung?
Absolutely.
I thought as much. Mary, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really wish you good luck with your film projects and for exploring this non-dualism that makes us so much richer in the way that you tell the story.
Appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still, I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle to see. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why.